First, the US President Joe Biden has approved a massive oil and gas drilling project in Alaska. The company behind it, Willow Project, says it is trying to create local investment and thousands of jobs. But there is likely to be a significant backlash from environmental organisations. Here's a closer look with Caroline Lamboulé.
It's the largest proposed oil drilling project on U.S. public land in decades. Supporters say it will bring hundreds of jobs and billions of dollars in revenue to state and federal coffers. But some local voices and nationwide groups have raised concerns about its impact on the environment.
The decision to approve Willow is in direct conflict with the urgent need to transition the United States and the world off fossil fuels. The administration continues to give lip service to the desire to be strong on the climate and strong in protecting environmental justice. These projects don't do that. Instead, they take us in the wrong direction and undermine our ability to actually build a livable future we need.
On Sunday, the Biden administration had said it would bar or limit drilling in some other areas of Alaska and the Arctic Ocean, a move that some groups described as an attempt to sugarcoat Monday's decision to okay the Willow Project. The project is located in Alaska's pristine western Arctic, in an area known as the National Petroleum Reserve. It will sit on the state's north slope, the largest tract of undisturbed public land in the U.S. Using the oil generated by the project would produce the equivalent of more than 239 million metric tons of greenhouse gases over 30 years. That's roughly equivalent to the combined emissions from 1.7 million passenger cars over the same time period. Still, though, there is widespread support in Alaska itself from across the political spectrum. One exception, though, is the mayor of Nuiqsut, whose city of around 500 people is closest to the proposed project. It could produce up to 180,000 barrels of oil per day, according to ConocoPhillips, the company behind the project. It had initially proposed 5 drilling sites. Only 3 were approved.
Well, now we can talk a little bit about both the environmental and political ramifications of the drilling with Shirley Sitbon from our science desk and Richard Johnson, who joins us from Queen Mary University in the UK. Welcome to you both. Good to have you on the programme. Shirley, if I could just come to you briefly, first of all, on the environmental impact. What will the main consequences be on wildlife and, crucially, on global warming as well?
Well, to get the idea of the impact it could have, we can look at the map again to see where it is. It's actually such a large area, the largest undisturbed area of federal land in the United States. It seems small on the map when you look at it. It just over the Arctic Circle. It seems small, but actually it's very, very large, and environmentalists have been saying that for wild animals, this is extremely vital because, for example, for wild birds, some of these areas have been nicknamed the Heathrow of wild birds because that's where they meet. It's crucial for wildlife, for biodiversity. Let's look at some of images of this reserve, the National Petroleum Reserve, and these images have actually been delivered by the company which will drill across this area, ConocoPhillips. And why are they giving us all these beautiful images of wildlife? Well, just to say that they've already been drilling in Alaska, and that has not disturbed wildlife there. We can see pipelines, etc., in their images. Of course, environmentalists do not share that opinion. They believe that wildlife will be disturbed, and the United States government has yet tried to find a deal that will allow animals and biodiversity to continue almost undisturbed while continuing to develop Alaska's economy. That was wildlife, but let's look at also the effects on global warming, the emissions that this will lead to. Because the site will 180,000 of barrels per day will be produced there, and this will lead to many more, to something more than 500 million overall in the 30 years, and this will emit indirectly 263 million tons of greenhouse gases. So for global warming, it's obviously bad news for those who care about global warming and who want to limit the climate change. They say that the United States said it will not have these new drills, and this is a new drill.
And local communities in Alaska, there are lots of people who are concerned about the impact this project is having on the environment, Shirley. But there are others who say, actually, it's a good idea because of the economic benefits it would reap.
Yes, because they're thinking jobs and Alaska's economy depends largely on oil production, and the company which will hold this project says $17 billion will be generated and will be brought to local communities. So elected officials, both to the Senate and to the House of Representatives, both Democrat and Republican, they all agree that this is a great deal. Alaska needs this. Alaska's not just a reserve. It's not just biodiversity. It's real people who want to get money and want to live with jobs. That's their view. Of course, in the global objective, the United States says it wants to help preserve land, wants to preserve biodiversity. It says it does not want to emit. It wants to cut down emissions. So this goes against the idea and the promises made by Joe Biden and Democrats.
Indeed. Well, let's talk about some of those promises now with Richard Johnson from Queen Mary University. Thanks for staying with us, sir. It's good to have you.
Thank you.
As Shirley alluded to there, back when Joe Biden was a candidate for the presidency in 2020, he promised there would be no more drilling on federal lands. That's a quote. So, and he is a big supporter of action on climate change, isn't he? So why are we seeing this U-turn now, do you think?
The Biden administration has been emphasizing that this decision was not one that was without constraints. And what I mean by that is there's a legal context to this that goes well before the Biden administration. Biden's Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, issued a video yesterday explaining that this decision was the consequence of past decisions. So in 1999, the Clinton administration leased the land to ConocoPhillips. They've been given permits for other work on that land over that time that gives them a legal basis to put in a petition for a permit that was initially granted by the Trump administration. Then the courts delayed it, and then the Biden administration, in effect, has had to implement the kind of legal process that was ongoing. This, of course, is difficult because, as you say, Biden made this political promise in 2020. Environmentalists are a core constituency of the Democratic Party. When Biden came in on his first day as president, he signed an executive order banning the leasing of for new oil and gas extraction on federal lands. That was then overturned in the courts. So he's up against it. There's a legal system that's baked in through years of legislation and past precedent and judicial decisions that can box him in to a certain extent unless he could pass significant legal reform through Congress, which is not going to be very likely when the Republicans control the House of Representatives.
Indeed, and clearly there are environmental activists who are really angry about this decision made by Biden. But I wonder actually how big a political storm you think this will be, because I note all three lawmakers who do represent Alaska in Congress support the drilling. They say mostly because they do want to bring in investment to the area.
In terms of presidential politics, Alaska is not in a tremendously significant state. It is a low population state. It has 3 electoral votes. Biden actually performed better than any Democrat in Alaska's history since the 1960s. In the last presidential election, the Democrats won the House seat in Alaska last year for the first time since the 1970s. So there's a little bit of a slight Democratic Party revival, and perhaps Biden is conscious of that and maybe wants to see how well he can do there. But that, I think, is not in of itself enough to explain what's going on here. Biden is thinking of politically crucial actors in the Democratic Party more generally, including people like Joe Manchin, that moderate senator in West Virginia, who've been putting pressure on Biden to basically ride 2 horses. Yes, support renewables, but also to allow the continuation of a degree of fossil fuel extraction. That was baked into the Inflation Reduction Act last year. There was a lot of the headlines about all of the investment for climate tackling, and that was a great achievement. But Joe Manchin got into that bill that when the federal government opens up land to be leased for wind farms, for example, it also has to open up equivalent land for fossil fuel extraction. So there's a bit of a poison pill there, and Biden is trying to balance these two, the moderates and the environmentalist wings of the Democratic Party.
And how do you think he will try to justify this to that more left-wing, eco-friendly wing of his party?
He has been doing quite a bit on climate action in other respects. So the Biden administration has put restrictions on various mining practices, for example, have put restrictions on logging in Alaska itself. And this announcement yesterday came with it the promise of protection of many acres of land and water. But critics would say, look, you know, these protections that Biden has put in, they don't have as strong a legal foundation as some of the legal advantages that the fossil fuel companies have. And so if, say, the Republicans win in 2 years' time, a lot of those protections that Biden announced yesterday, which we really haven't seen the details of yet, could go quite quickly. Ultimately, I think Biden is concluding that environmentalists see, you know, prefer the devil they know and see Biden as a friend with problems, and they're going to ultimately support him over a Republican who would be much more strongly in favor of further fossil fuel extraction and much less concerned about even offering any concessions on some of these environmental protections. You know, Biden brought the US back into the Paris Climate Accords, for example. He did do things that reverse some Trump administration practices. It may not be enough for some environmentalists, but at the end of the day, if the choice is between Joe Biden and a Republican candidate for president, I suspect they'll be choosing Joe Biden.
Richard Johnson from Queen Mary University, thank you, sir, very much indeed for your time and your analysis today.
Thank you.